What we're going to do is we're going to start here. These are all the sessions that we had throughout the year. And the way it would work is I would Zoom with you. We would record our sessions. You would then go back and watch those sessions as if you didn't know yourself. And then you would just write down any observation you had. When you look at yourself as a stranger, even though you're the one talking, and I'm just asking questions, what was that process like for you?
It was very eye-opening. I think for me, more of my imperfections definitely came about, and having to look yourself really through a video, but in the mirror, and just see all of that. I think there's also some positives, and see where your strengths are, but I think it's just being able to see both and see how, you can improve and where you're doing pretty well at.
What do you think the biggest realization was as you started to go on this journey? This is the growth point that I need to attack.
I think I was at times pretty realistic with myself. I think we've talked about it a bunch, of erring on the side of delusion or, reality. And I was more on that side of the spectrum with being, just maybe too real in certain moments. And that self-confidence and self-belief, there could definitely be growth there, but that's all from these sessions and be able to see yourself.
And as you're navigating an alpha male environment and you're asking yourself to increase your self-trust, to increase your voice, what is the best thing you learned that you could share with another young person that's trying to find their voice?
I think in that moment, and talking about being present in the moment, like having the confidence and that urge when you know when to speak up, to do it. And I think when I kind of switched that thought of being present in the moment and seizing that moment, it allowed myself to have confidence. And this is the perfect moment to speak up. And
what prevented you from doing it when you'd feel the urge prior?
I think it was probably the lack of doing it, the lack of speaking up, and maybe, knowing that in my upbringing and where I'm from in Hawaii, there was a lot of that, respect factor and listening to your elders or your coaches in a lot of my life that I just didn't have a lot of reps at it. But as I had the opportunity to go speak up, and I did it once, twice, a third time, my voice was trusted by my peers, but also, you gain confidence in what you want to say and how you want to come across in those moments.
And what he's referring to is he transferred twice and had 2 years at those two institutions before getting to Oregon, where he only had 1. So the previous 2 stops, you could observe for a year and figure out the personalities of the team and then how to inject yourself, where you were front loading everything while trying to learn a new system. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think at UCF there's, kind of the young, innocent version of myself that, like you said, had the time to figure myself out. And then I make that transition to Oklahoma, a year of maybe some adversity, but you're able to, make that change in that second year. But at Oregon, time was of the essence, and you have this 1 year, really 6 months of the offseason to not only build trust, learn an offense, but also establish yourself as a leader. And I think that was challenging and uncomfortable, but like we always talk about, it's the best opportunity to grow and become a better version of yourself.
My favorite thing too, early on, is as you're learning the new system, your tendency was to go inside. And then you had to convince yourself, like, if I'm trying to accelerate trust, I can't waste mistakes because these guys need to know how I'm gonna respond under stress. And you flipped your mind. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, practice is a great opportunity to show how you're gonna be in a game atmosphere. And whether it's a mistake.
Why didn't you look at that prior?
I think it's that piece of maybe not acting in the moment and being confident in that moment with, hey, I meet this person for the first day or maybe the first week. There's probably some things you won't say to someone in that first week, but I think your ability to be a leader and create a comfortability to have conversation and find solutions is important. And I think when I kind of changed my mind in that atmosphere in a practice setting, with a receiver, just using as a receiver as an example, whether it's good or bad, we're talking after a rack, of 4 plays, and being able to talk through each play And maybe my first rack I talked to the X receiver. The second rack I talked to the Z receiver or the Y. You know, I tried to make it a point that you can talk through it, and that's regardless of the outcome, what they saw in each and every play.
What was the hardest thing when you're watching some P- activity, so an undesired process, but they're getting the results? What's the toughest thing about leadership in that moment?
I think we live in a results, driven sport and really life that once you get a great outcome, nobody's thinking about how you got there. And in football sense, you score a touchdown, everyone's excited. Maybe there's a missed block or a miscue in something that should happen, and I think that you kind of lose it in those emotions of celebration. But I think that's still an opportunity for us to be able to talk about it and get back to the sideline. And luckily we had the iPad, so we can talk through each and every choice that we made on the field, right or wrong, and just try to get back to where we were of, hey, this is a great process and how we get to a certain play, and hey, we got it this time, but to stay consistent, we're not always going to live on the right side.
Well, and your experience at Oklahoma, the first year, you guys weren't as good as the second year, and you got to see the conditionality of the fan base. What did you learn from that?
It's an interesting world. And I say that because in the beginning of the year, there's a bunch of hope. Once you get in the year, then action does a lot of the talking. And I feel like the difference between winning and losing is very minuscule. And I saw that in the first year to the second year. Maybe there wasn't too much of a difference, other than mentally we've been through some things together and wanted to get on the right side of it. But, I challenge everyone to, continue to be obsessed with the process and the preparation and the work, because that gives the most consistent results. And I can go back and say that year one wasn't the best process, and we refined it, and we're able to get people on board to this vision that we had and how we're going to do it. But I think the best way you can be successful is just being internal and having a team that's trusting a vision and trusting one another.
What makes it hard to do that when the outside has so much, in the sport of football, especially college football, campus, you're constantly surrounded by it because you're going to class or whatever. Yep. How do you shield them from the external expectations and shift it to the internal standards?
It's tough because you think about a 120-man roster with a bunch of coaches. They're all on social media. They're all, listening to, the TV that's playing in the cafeteria. There's a lot of opportunity for noise to be infiltrated in your internal circle. And, that's why I purposely turn it off and try to shut it off. But I think the more people that you can gather and doing the same, that allows you to just continue to listen to the right message. And that's what the team is all about. And I think that also goes with alignment. Coaches got to believe in it. Players got to believe in it. Even support staff. Everyone's got to believe in this vision that you have, and that's to not listen to the outside noise and protect the team.
So at Oklahoma, they got to 7-0, and you didn't handle, you called it a fragile 7-0. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think everyone understands that OU Texas game, depending who you're a fan of, or a Texas OU game. I think everyone understands that environment in that game, and the importance for both sides of it and that rivalry. And I think, after a year of going 6-7 into a year that, 5-0 going into that game, the expectation was to go win it, and we did. But after that win, we had a bye week, and I'd like to say there was a longer celebration than needed. And I think that's because of the year prior. And I think when you're in a losing state, it is easier to grind and know that there's small steps. But once you're in a winning state and protecting, that winning environment, it's a lot more difficult because social media starts coming up again. The noise starts coming up again. You're walking by, the cafeteria looking at the TV, and they're talking about you in a positive light. And I think for many people, it's hard to handle that. And, we go into that next game against UCF, squeeze one out. But it was a fragile 7-0 because it was tough. We weren't ever in that position and knew how to handle winning and success. But that was, where it got tricky.
And that's what was so interesting to me. That year, you talked about how it feels like you're halfway through the season, but the second half of that mountain to climb is so much harder than the first. Can you speak to that?
I think to get over that second mountain, it's even tougher because you have to be even more focused. That maybe that light at the end of the tunnel you think is closer than it really is, but it's not. And each game gets tougher and tougher in a way that the focus, how intentional you are at practice, and the interviews, or maybe the consistent media throughout a week has to kind of get pushed off and get right back to what got you to what you're at, which is at.
Why is it so hard, especially when you're building it, to see there's not a lot of activity here, but then as you go through the season and how it's like more and more people, you almost embrace them because this is what it should be, and you forget that none of those people were there, and now you're allowing those people to distract you from what actually brought them there.
It's real. I remember after our last game at FSU, in that bowl game, the lack of media, or maybe the lack of attention, rightfully so. However, the switch up to a 7-0, or after a OU Texas game, it's interesting because it all makes sense, right? You have success, everyone's going to follow the most successful team. However, what's even crazier is your switch up internally, and knowing that maybe that is how it's supposed to feel, but also what got us to that point is the focus, the intentionality, the daily grind and daily decisions that helped us, basically form our mentality.
Well, and you started the season at Oregon, ranked number 2. Then you guys fell to number 9 after winning 3 straight games, just because you weren't winning at the expectation level. And then you beat Ohio State, national TV, everyone's watching. What was that like from a leadership perspective on what you were trying to message throughout the team?
I felt like personally I was able to right my wrong, and knowing that I literally was there just a year prior. But I felt what was even cooler was the maturity of our whole team and the alignment from our head coach. We were all speaking the same language. So if players were saying, hey, let's dial in, let's focus, coach was voicing the same thing. And he allowed us to continue to grow our voice.
Well, that's his gift, isn't it?
It is.
So Dan Lanning is the football coach. This is a great one. So they're in the Pacific Northwest, getting closer to December, and guys are talking about the indoor, and it was a little bit cold that day. And he had gotten wind that people were complaining about the weather. Guess what he does? What'd he do?
We practice outside.
And he will show up to practice without a shirt on.
Yep.
And it's just a visual cue, like, come on, man. And he walked that standard around that. And one of my favorite things that you challenge yourself with is, okay, Ohio State just lost. We won. Who's going to win the development game this week? Because they're going to wake up hungry as hell just because of the outcome. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think just going into that next week, I think everyone knew how important it was as, a veteran group. But what I loved about Coach Lanning is he allowed us to truly have a voice in the locker room. And I think everyone says it, but when you're in that environment and, basically a team meeting is him 30 seconds talking about what we got today, and he leaves, and then it's all players speaking. I think that's, the true environment that you want as a player, because we're out there playing. And you got to have guys having a voice, not just a quarterback or a leader on the defense, but really in every position group. And I think throughout that week and even beyond, you felt different voices coming up. And whether it's motivation or just their voice, I think you are definitely tuned in to hear them talk.
Week 3, you guys go to number 9. Week 7, you're now at number 1, which you held till the very last game. What did you notice about the progression and regression? And then importance of like, here's what we have to have if we're going to live at number one?
I think for the first time, because of how game one went, we didn't really pay attention. And coach even talked about like a preseason top 25, like half of the people won't even be on the list at the end of the season. So we did a really good job at not focusing on that. But I think when you're at number one, that's a little different, you know, and everyone is hearing the praise. And that's where I kind of go back to when we had that at Oklahoma, we were able to, you know, kind of right your wrongs and be able to, you know, approach it a certain way with a certain mentality, and kind of get the whole, not only the leadership group, but also the whole team just on the same, you know, goal and vision of what we wanted to accomplish. It wasn't just being number one, but, you know, having a goal down the road.
One of my favorite things, we talked about it earlier, about being one of the guys. What kind of car did you drive?
Chrysler Pacifica minivan. Yeah.
So think about this. This is your starting quarterback. Dan thinks that they got him the wrong car. So he goes into the office mad as hell, like, what are we doing? We're messing this up. And he's like, no, this is what I actually wanted. And what I think that was so symbolic. Can you speak to the symbolism that we talked about with that?
Well, number one, insurance is cheaper, so we'll start there. But number two, I think when this whole NIL era was going on, I think everyone was focusing on how this person's doing this, and it truly isolated people from a team. And I saw that at UCF, even at Oklahoma. And I think walking into a new program, new teammates, new coaches, I think you want to set the precedent on the type of person you are. And it wasn't about being flashy. It wasn't about, you know, being this quarterback and how I want to be so separate from the team. I want to be one of the guys. I want them to know that there's no one person bigger than the program or too small. And I think, you know, I was able to show that through a vehicle that I drive, but also that I'm simple. You know, it doesn't take much. I am focused on the right things, and I came here to win and be a great teammate.
And my favorite thing, and there's so much symbolism about what we're going to show, and I'm going to cue Zack to put that up on the screen, the Heisman moment, is you are inclusive, and you do disassociate with status.
Yep.
And so when you're minivan Dillon, like, you're basically inviting everyone in.
Yep.
You go to the Heisman, and this is what you wear on your wrist. Talk about that.
I think in a certain moment, as you get to that point, I don't want to say I think I thought that things changed, but you know, I let myself fall for the cheese. And I look at it as you're not really living what you're saying, right? You're driving a minivan, but you're rocking a $100,000 watch. So it's who are you really, you know? And truth be told, those are rented and right back at the jewelry store. So so if you think about that for a second, right? Nobody would know that just in the audience. But since I say it, and it's probably about how half of kind of that deal is, I think it's not truly who I am, and it's representing maybe a misrepresentation of what I'm really about.
And you were really mad at yourself in reflection. And so your biggest battle is with perfectionism.
Yep.
That is your biggest hurdle to clear. How did you find the grace to say, no, this is the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because it shows that I'm impressionable around my environment, and I need to learn how to have an inner strength to combat some of those norms that are projected onto me?
It's the number one reminder. Whenever there is success, whenever maybe that is a thought that you're not more than you really are, but a result is changing you, it's like, don't forget that moment of maybe trying to be something you're not or more than you're not. But for me, it's perfect. It happened at a great time on the biggest stage, And it's a great reminder for me to just be truly what I'm about, you know, and that's loving people, loving my day-to-day is something I take pride in. And then, you know, you look at it and shoot, you should just get a picture and put it right on the refrigerator.
It's a beautiful representation of the growth that you had. And what are you driving now?
Instead of a white Chrysler Pacifica minivan, I'm driving a black one, so it's good.
And that is an NFL quarterback who is not forgetting where he came from and is going to inject his norms on his environment. Let's give it up for Dillon.